So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our introduction to AWS. So for today, we're just going to go over some of the basic concepts of AWS itself, and also talk about some of the services that are available, and hopefully I could leave some time at the end for you to ask any questions. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. So for AWS, it has places all across the world. Okay, these are called regions, and inside each region, the number tells you how many availability zones there are. Now, for this map, it is a bit outdated. What I mean by that is that some of these ones that shows are new regions are actually available at this moment. So Canada has gotten its eastern one, and I think they're getting a western one as well. There's always new regions being developed throughout kind of their work. Okay. So for your AWS services, the first thing you have to decide is which region to use. Now, the region usually would depend on your actual location, right? So if you are located, let's say in North America, you would choose the East Coast or the West Coast, depending on where you are, right? If you are in, let's say, China, you would most likely use the Beijing region. If you're in Australia, you'll most likely use the Sydney region. Okay? The reason you want to choose a region that's close to you is that even though you're using cloud computing, there is still a delay due to the command and data transfer, right? So when you send a command to the server, it will be sent to the region that you picked. And then the data that's stored in that region will be sent to you as well, right? So that delay might not seem like a big issue if we're just doing simple commands. But imagine that you're doing this on a daily basis, right? And you're sending multiple commands throughout the day. That delay does add up. So the best practice is just to choose a region that is closest to you. Okay. In terms of international companies, what they will do is they will have different regions for different regional headquarters, right? So like my example before, so let's say in the West Coast, they choose Oregon region for the West Coast headquarters. For the East Coast, they choose North Virginia. For China, they choose Beijing. And for Australia, they choose Sydney, right? So each regional headquarters will mainly work with that region, okay? But they will also have a global headquarters. So let's say the global headquarters is in the North California region. Okay? So what will happen is that periodically, the different regions will send the data to the, let's say, North California region for the headquarters to compile and to make a big report. Okay? They don't do this on a daily basis, or they don't do this very frequently, because if you're sending data within the region, it is mostly free. But if you send data across region, there will be a cost. Right? So for these international companies, the reason they want to have different regions is due to eliminating the delay as much as possible. But due to the fact that they need to send data to one central location, they will take on the cost, but they will try to do it as infrequently as possible while keeping the data as updated as possible. Right? So there's kind of like a trade-off. Another difference between the regions is that some regions, as you can see, are newer, while others are older. The older regions are more developed. So all these services are available, let's say in North Virginia, whereas in the Montreal region, even though it is up and running, some services might not be available yet, but they're being migrated or they're being implemented in those regions. Okay? So when you are picking a region, you may also want to think about which one has existed for a period of time and which one is relatively new. Okay? So for my use case, usually I would use the North Virginia region, even though the Montreal region might be closer since I'm in Toronto, right? But because North Virginia is older, all the services are more well developed, I would still stick with North Virginia until Montreal has taken a period of time to develop and for the services to be made available there. The way that the AWS system works is that first, like I mentioned, you pick your region and you get assigned to an availability zone. Now, these zones, they are given with these indicator letters. Okay. Again, this is a bit outdated. There might be a bit more availability zones now. Okay. Physically, what they are, each availability zone is a data warehouse. So it has their own server room in that zone. And for the case of fault tolerance, so if something happens, they will separate the availability zone as far away as possible. So if you're working, let's say in the Virginia region, right, maybe zone A and zone B goes offline due to, let's say, power outage or earthquake or tornadoes or any other unforeseen circumstances. Well, the other zones should still be up and running. So it's very unlikely for the entire region to go offline. And even if you are in a zone that is being affected, there is a free transfer for you to be transferred to the one that's still up and running. So your service will still be able to run and still be able to process while they fix the issue and then transfer you back. Okay. Similarly, they have that kind of policy for the regions as well. So if in some circumstance, the region does go offline, right, they will have a backup to a close by region. So while they fix the issue for the entire region, your work will still proceed, but there might be a bit of delay due to the distance, right? So overall, AWS and I would say any cloud provider is very wary about this issue. So they are trying to make sure that if one region does stop, the others will still continue, right? So it's not going to be the entire thing goes offline, and everyone who's using, let's say, AWS or Google Cloud or Azure has to stop their work. Now, on the earlier days of cloud computing, this did happen to Google, right? So I'm not sure if you've experienced this yourself, but I think it was in 2011, 2010-ish. There was a day when the entire Google server went offline. So the Google Drive and all kind of Google related cloud items are not accessible. So at that time, I was using Google Drive more because it's an easier way to save documents. And when I search up what happened, I see a lot of threads going on where companies are just saying, well, they just had to end their workday because all their data is stored in Google Drive and they cannot retrieve any. Right? So that is something a company has to be aware of. Right? But nowadays, with the distribution of the regions and zones, that is very unlikely to happen. Okay? But there's still a possibility where it could happen if it's massively hacked. But we're more comfortable with it now. Okay? After we choose our zones and our regions, we had to make our stores. Okay, so in AWS, it's called S3, and S3 stands for Simple Storage Service. Right, so 3 S's. That's why it's called S3. Okay? The way that S3 works, each S3 is called a bucket. So you create a name for that bucket, and everything that you upload or everything that you store in that bucket will be given a unique URI. And the way the URI is usually created, you have the bucket name, then the folders that you created, and then the subfolders, and all the way down to the object itself. Due to the fact that each object has to have a unique URI, one limitation on the bucket is that the name of the bucket has to be globally unique. So it's not just you have two different buckets and they cannot be the same name, but is that if there are two buckets that exist in the entire globe, right, for all users of AWS, they cannot have the same name. So the example I like to give is, let's say you cannot create a bucket called Toronto because that bucket already exists. After the bucket or our storage, we have our compute. So in EC2, this is called EC2, and it stands for Elastic Cloud Compute. So E and two C's, EC2. Okay. And the way that you can think about EC2 is it's just a virtual computer. Okay. But physically, what happens is that in a big server warehouse, right, on one of these trays, you are taking up a portion of one of the server. Okay. This portion has a RAM for memory and a processing speed or a CPU. Okay. So when you are requesting an EC2, you are only requesting a very small bit from this big warehouse. Now, EC2 is a kind of paid service when you are using it, but you only pay for as much as you use it. So it starts the clock once it starts, and it ends once you kind of stop it or terminate it. Okay? Due to fault tolerance, a lot of companies will request a bunch of EC2, but when that happens, the EC2s are not going to be all next to each other. So let's say they have 20 EC2, right? One will be here, one will be somewhere else, right? And another will be like somewhere different in the warehouse, right? So just in case one of these machines goes offline or gets broken, right? At least the other EC2 instances can continue to work. For EC2, you can choose how big your memory is and how big your CPU is. And you are being charged on an hourly basis, right? So it is per instance per hour. You can always decide to make it bigger, which will be more expensive, or smaller, which will be a bit cheaper. Another way to look at the EC2 price, there is an on-demand price, which is a flat price that you pay and you guarantee the spot. And there is a on-spot price or spot instance price. So spot instances are due to the fact that there's so many possible instances that most likely Amazon is not going to sell them all, right? So throughout the day, there are probably going to be a lot of empty spots, right, in the server. So instead of charging you the on-demand price, they'll lower it at the discount rate for a spot instance price. Now, unlike on-demand price, spot instance, the price does fluctuate, right, due to the demand. So when you are requesting a spot instance, you need to set a maximum price. Right? Because if you just have one price, and let's say it increases by 2 cents, right? You're not paying the extra 2 cents, then they'll terminate your instance. So usually you will set a maximum price, and most of the company will practice by setting it to the on-demand price. So if for some reason it gets really busy and the spot instances are hitting the on-demand price, then they will just terminate the spot instance and create a new one which is on-demand, because on-demand is a fixed price. It doesn't change no matter how busy Amazon gets, and you always have a spot once it's given to you. Okay. After that, we have our warehouse. So in Amazon, there's something called Redshift. Okay, Redshift uses a SQL language and it uses distributed computing. So for those who are not familiar with distributed computing, it's just a cluster or a group of instances that are working together. Okay? In this cluster, we have a leader node. Sometimes it's called a master node. So there's different names for the same type. And the leader node is the one that will receive the command from the user itself. And after the command is received, the task will be divided into multiple compute nodes or multiple worker nodes. Okay. The worker nodes are the ones that will go to your storage and take the data and do the processing, but they will do it in partitions. So they do not take the entire data from the storage. They will take, let's say, the first 10,000 rows or the first 10 files into itself and do the process. Once all the worker nodes are done the process, they'll send the final result, which usually is filtered and aggregated, so the size is reduced, back to the leader node, and the leader node will then present the result back to you, back to the user. Okay. You can also think about this in a workplace scenario, right? So the user is like the CEO or the corporate manager, right? This person will give a task to the team leader, right? The team leader will then divide the task to the teammates, the workers, right? And each worker will be in charge of their own subtask inside the entire task. And once it's done, they'll give back to the leader, and the leader will make a presentation or final presentation to your stockholders, right? So same way here with our distributed computing. And because Redshift uses SQL, you can actually connect Redshift to any IDE that runs on SQL Server. Right? So if you have SQL Workbench or DataGrip or any other tools that you use, there is a way for you to make that connection. And inside Redshift, there is a place you can find the correct configuration. So all you have to do is kind of copy and paste into the connection box, dialog box, and you can access Redshift through your own computer. Now, the Redshift will be charging you money while it is running as well, right? And once it goes offline, the connection will also be lost. So as soon as you're using Redshift, you're paying for the money, and while you're using it, you're paying for the continued storage of the data. And once it's offline, then nothing will work, right? So even if you do make a connection to the database, but you turn off Redshift to save money, the connection will be lost. Okay. After this, we have our EMR cluster. So EMR stands for Elastic Map Reduce. Okay. This is usually to handle big data. Okay. And the way that EMR works, similar to Redshift, it works on the principle of distributed computing. So again, we have one master node or one leader node and multiple slave nodes or worker nodes. Okay. The way that EMR works is that the slave nodes, once you retrieve the data, you store the data into itself. Okay, so kind of like when you download a file right onto your computer, it's there on your computer now. Okay. And the slave nodes here will again do its own process by the partition. And for the fault tolerance purposes, there is a duplication of the data. So one partition will not be stored on one node only. It'll be stored by default on 3 different nodes. So again, if one of the slave nodes goes offline, you can still do the same process without missing any data, right? Because it is stored on other nodes, and you can continue to do that until the node comes back offline, comes back online, or you can request for new node. Okay. Another popular distributed computing tool in the industry is called Spark. The way that Spark is different to EMR is that these worker nodes in Spark do not store the data onto itself. Okay? or at least that's by default. So you can use a line of code to ask it to store the data onto itself. But by default, Spark worker nodes will go and retrieve the data, do its process, send the result to the leader node, and then clean itself out. The advantage of that is the slave nodes or the worker nodes in Spark can have less memory than the slave nodes in EMR. Okay? Because EMR had to have enough room to store all the data that you're going to use, whereas for Spark, you don't need that much room, right? And Spark will work continuously, right? So if it's retrieving data and it's too big, you divide that into further partitions, and you just work on each individual partition at a time. Once it's done, you send it, erase the result, get the next partition, work on it, send it, and so on and so forth. Okay. So the two languages, Hadoop, which is EMR, and Spark, which is something that is newer, and I think a lot more companies are starting to use over Hadoop. So before I continue, are there any questions so far about the structure of AWS? So please type into the chat for your question. Okay, so I'll assume that either you're typing, but it's a bit slower due to the amount of things you want to say, or there is no question. So I will move on for now and show you the actual interface in AWS. Okay, and today we're not going to do a lot of things hands-on, just because some of you may not have an AWS account yet. And if you don't have one, you don't need to create one today. The reason is AWS has a free tier availability for new users, but it does expire 1 year after the activation, right? So once you log in, it activates, and then after 1 year, it expires. So if you're just here for the info session and you're not joining our big data courses, then I'll say don't sign up for it now, right? Wait until you start the big data portion and then sign up for it so that you can use the full advantage of free tier. But if you are doing your own practice and you do want to try out AWS, sign up for it at any time, just know that after 1 year, the free tier does expire and you would have to pay for these services. So let me change my screen and we will move to our AWS. Can you use another email to register to extend the free tier? I believe when you register, it asks for a credit card information along with your email. So I think both of them will be tied to your account. So unless you have multiple credit cards that you can use, then you cannot just register with a new email with the same credit card. I believe that's the case. You can try out. Okay. For AWS, it's always like pay for your use. So if you sign up for it and you don't use it, even after the free tier, they're not going to charge you a subscription fee, right? So let's say you sign up to play around with it, and then at the end you just kind of leave it behind, but you don't have any service running. You don't have to worry about like canceling your account, because as long as there's no service that is constantly running, you don't have to pay anything. Okay? So let me send you this link. It's a very simple link to remember as well, right? And it's just aws.amazon.com. Okay, so when you get here, there is a sign in button. Once you click here, you can always sign up. So I don't remember where the sign up is, but you can always sign up for your account on that page. Now, there's actually two ways to sign in to your AWS account. So if you are creating an account for your own use, you'll be using what's called a root user. Okay? So root user, you can think of it like the administrator of the account. Of course, if you were to enter a company, you don't have the root user access, right? Because the root user has all access with billing, with security, with services, right? With even closing the account itself. So usually the root access will be the actual owner of, so I can answer that. So of the account itself, right? So if you do sign up for your own account, you will be accessing through root user using your email and then typing a password to set up. Okay? But for realistic sake, you will be using what's called an IAM user. And the question in the chat. So yes, I will go over some of the policies and permissions in IAM today. Okay. IAM user is just a user underneath the organization. So basically that will be you if you do get access to the AWS account. Okay. So the company or the root user will be able to set what your permissions are. So that will be whether or not you can use the service, what can you do with the service? So whether that's create or just read or even delete objects in the service, right? And how you access the service. So there is two main ways of accessing AWS services. There is the console, which I'm going to show you today, and there is the command line interface. So basically, you don't log into the website. You just install AWS CLI on your own computer. So let me type in the chat. Okay. So AWS CLI stands for Amazon Web Service Command Line Interface. Right. So you install that, you will be given a access key to identify yourself. Right. So that's kind of like your login. And once you log in through your terminal, you can start using code to manipulate services and to navigate in the different areas. Okay. So to answer the question in the chat, yes, I will be using the IAM Identity Center today to show you how do we even create a user, what it would do with users, and some of the permissions. Okay. But let me just log in first. Okay. So once you log in, you will be directed to the home page. Your name will be on top, or at least the name of the account will be here. Okay. And you will usually have a recently visited services that are here just for easy access. Okay. I'll teach you how to navigate through the service in just a bit. But first, I want to show you the permissions and the IAM Identity Center. Okay. So if you log in as a root user, you can always create all the IAM users yourself. Okay. And I was in a company, if you have managerial level, you may be given permission to do this as well. So to access that, you will go to the top right-hand corner where it says your name. Okay. Click on it, and you will go down to security. Okay. So in the security credentials, you can see some of the information about your account. Okay. And to go to the IAM user, you go to the left-hand side under the access management. Okay. You click on users. So in here, you have different users that is already created. When did they last log in? How long ago did they change their password? And so on and so forth. Okay. And to create a user, you can just click here for create user. Okay. So in here, first thing you want to do is to give it a name. So I'm just going to call this Lens and Learn or Lens Learn. Okay, as our demo. Okay. And you are asked if you want to give them permission for the management console, which means do you want them to be able to log into this website? Okay. So if you say yes, you can generate the password. So whether it's auto-generated or custom password, and you can always ask the user to set a new password after they log in. Okay. If you say no, then this step will be skipped, right? So they will not have access to the console itself, even though they are a user in your organization. Okay. Again, I would say most likely if you're joining a company, you do not have access to the console, just because changing something in the console is very easy, right? It's like a few clicks. Whereas if you are changing in the command line interface, you need to use the actual code and basically go through that process, right? So it's a bit more difficult that way. Now, here are the permissions that you were asking about. So there is generally 3 ways to give permissions to a user. So the first way is to add the user to a group. Now, I'll say this is used more often due to the fact that each group will have a unique set of permissions. So when you have a new employee, you can just add the employee to the group, and that employee will have the same permission as all other users in that group. Okay. The other way is to copy permission. So this is, like I said, take the permission from one user and attach it to you as well. Okay. Both of them will require you to have a pre-setup, right, to create a user group or to create another user before you can use them. Okay. But for new or the first unique user that you want, you can use the attach policies directly. Okay. And here you can either search for an existing policy or you can create a policy yourself, right? So you can customize policies, but you will need to know like the standard syntax, which we don't have enough time to go through it today. Okay. But here you can search, let's say EC2, right? And you can look for what kind of permission you want to give. So there's full access, means they can create, delete, terminate, access, all that. There's read only, where they can only, I think, access EC2, right? And the policy is basically the permissions, right? So if we just open one up, right? So basically it's saying like, what can you do with that service? Okay? So are you allowing it? Are you not allowing it or, taking out, right? So each policy will be different. And you can attach as many or as few policies as you want. Like, as you can see, there is more than 1,000. Okay. Yeah, if I do have time, I'll show you the AWS CLI in just a bit as well. Okay. So you can, create a user and add all your policies. If you are doing it for your own practice, so let's say you want to create a IAM user and to practice it yourself, you can always just do the admin access and just attach them in. Of course, this is not realistic in the real world because you're not going to give anyone else an admin access. Okay. So for demonstration purposes, I'll just attach the EC2. Okay. And once you're done, you basically click on the next. Okay. Here you can review, right? Make sure everything is done correctly. If not, you can go back through the steps. Okay. And when this is done, you're going to click on create user. So then this will activate the user itself. Okay. And on this page, it's very important for you to download the CSV file. Okay. In the CSV file, you contain all your credentials. So give me 1 second here. Right. So you could contain all your credentials, your name, your temporary password, how to log in, and so on and so forth. And this is usually what you would get in a welcome package to the company, right? So they'll send you this file to say, hey, here is our login, right? With our company name. Here is your username, and here's a temporary password. Right, so you just go to aws.amazon.com, sign in, and then you change your password there. Okay. If you don't click on download CSV at this step, it's very difficult for you to have that file. So if you're creating one, make sure you click on download CSV before you click on return to users. Okay. All right. Now, the other question here is for the AWS CLI. Okay. So for the AWS CLI, you do not log into the console itself. You would. So let me just get here instead. Okay. So you would have the user. Okay. And they will create what's called, sorry, here. So create what's called the access keys. Okay. So this is a pair of keys. One is the public key, which will stay with Amazon, and the other is the private key. Well, technically you have both, right? But the public key is kind of attached to your account. The private key is kind of like the opening of the lock, right? So you need both to access the account. For the access keys, each user can have at most 2 pairs of access keys. Okay, so you can create access key very easily, saying you want to use command line interface, and just say I understand. Right, go to next. Tags I usually just leave them blank unless you want to organize it yourself. Create. Okay, and just like the IAM user, make sure you download the CSV file. Okay, and this is because on this page you have the public key and the secret key. Once you click on done, you'll never be able to find the secret key if you don't have your CSV file. Okay, so if you forget to click on download CSV and you forget to copy it from here, and you click on done, well, you'll never get the secret access key again. Okay, so there's no way for you to get the secret key again. Okay, so all you have to do is deactivate it, delete it, and create a new one. Now, with access keys, like I mentioned, you can have at most 2, but for security purposes, you should have only 1. Okay, so even though you can create 2 pairs, do not have both of them active at the same time. Okay, because just in case for some reason your CSV file gets interrupted or gets taken by someone else, and they can use your key to access your account as well. Right? In your company, anything that happens with this key will go back to you. Right? So if someone were to do something bad with the key, right, they're not going to get in trouble. You will, because it's attached to your username. Okay. Now, with the AWS CLI, you would need to have a Linux terminal. Now, the reason I call it Linux terminal and not just terminal is because Windows users do not have Linux pre-installed in their system. So the easiest way for Windows users is to use what's called a Git for Windows. So I'll send you this link. Okay, this is a free software that you would have to install if you are a Windows user. Okay, and this just gives you access to Linux commands. And all you need in all the packages is to kind of git bash. So you look like this image once you install it. Okay. For Mac users, it's a bit simpler. All you have to do is access your terminal, and Linux is already pre-installed in there for you. Okay. The other thing you need for AWS CLI is to have Python installed on your computer. Okay. So that one, I'll just leave up to you to research because that's a quick Google search to get. Right. And once you have Python, you would just say pip install AWS CLI on your own computer. You'll run through the installation itself. Okay. And once it's done, and you have your access keys. Okay. Oops, not this one, sorry. You have your access keys, right? So your public and your secret access key, which are both strings. Okay. What you would do is you use AWS configure to set your credentials. Okay. So you ask for your access key, so you can just copy and paste. Okay. You ask for your secret access key, again, copy and paste. Okay. Then you ask for your default region name. Okay. And the way you can find your default region is in the console. So if you have access, otherwise your company will tell you which region, right? So if you are doing it yourself, you can find the region name on the top right-hand corner, right? The second one next to your name. And you will need to use the identifier string and not the name of the region. So if you want to use North Virginia, for example, it'll be US-East-1. If you want to use, let's say, Canada Central, it'll be CA-Central-1. Right? So you need to use the identifier string. And the last step you ask you is the output format. Now, this can be any type of format, but I prefer to stick with JSON just due to the flexibility of the file format. Okay. And now with this, you are basically connected and you are able to work with the services as that user in the AWS account. Okay. And if you're worried because you are copying and pasting a lot of strings, right, to your configure, right? So let's say you're not sure if you copy them correctly. Okay, you can always do AWS configure again. Okay. And all you're going to check are the last, sorry. All you're going to check is the last 4 digits of your keys. Make sure they match up because everything else is encrypted. Okay. If it's matching up, you don't have to copy again. Just hit enter to go to the next prompt, right? So enter, enter, enter. And again, it's the same, right? So if it's correct, you don't have to do anything, just hit enter. If it's incorrect, copy and paste in the correct one and then hit enter to update your credentials. Okay. So the question in the chat, the recording will be made available for download. I'm not sure for download, but I think we do upload it onto our YouTube and we do share it in our Discord channel. So make sure you join our Discord so you can have access to it, I think, the next day. Okay. Now for the AWS CLI, there's a bit more command. Again, I don't have enough time today to go through all of them. So you can just go and search for the white paper. Okay. They will give you some kind of hints on the command itself. Okay. So this is not the best page, but you can search for it. Just search AWS CLI commands or search for the service you want to work with AWS CLI, and they will give you a few commands for you to run. All right, so let me show you some of the services that are available in AWS, right? And especially the ones I kind of mentioned in the slides before. Okay. So to access these services, there's 2 general ways. One is to click on the services button. Okay. So all your recently visited will be here, and you can go through the other services by looking through the categories. Right, so let's say storage, I can go to S3. For compute, I can go to EC2, so on and so forth. Okay. The other way to go about it is just to type in the search bar the name of the service. Okay. So again, S3, usually the first one, or EC2. Okay. So I would say the search bar might be faster just because you probably know the name of the service you want to access. The services might be preferred if you don't know the actual names, but you know the category and you're kind of searching for it. So let me first show you S3. So for S3, there's actually two types, as you can see here. Okay? There's a regular S3 and there's S3 Glacier. Okay? S3 Glacier is for archive. So basically, you compress your files even further to save you some space, and you'll be saved at a cheaper price than S3 itself. Okay? Um, the reason you don't want to always use S3 Glacier is because there will be a data transfer fee when you're accessing the files. Right? So in S3, if you are in the same region, there's really no charge for you to move files around between services, right? But because Glacier has this compression and then it needs this decompression, there will be an extra charge for it. So the files you would want to put into Glacier are kind of historical files that you're not going to use on a day-to-day or a regular basis, right? But for all regular files, you will put them into S3. Okay, and S3, just show you quickly, right? So S3 is charged based on gigabytes and it's tiered wise, right? So the first 50 terabytes is 2.3. For the next, so 51 to 500 terabyte is 2.2. And then for 501 and above, you'll be 2.1. Okay, and it's by gigabytes. So if you have some like really small file, it shouldn't really cost you anything because it's too small of an amount to charge you. Okay, but note that the pricing does change a little bit from region to region. Okay, so let's say Hong Kong, for example, it changed a little bit, right? For say Canada, right? So make sure you know the price of the region as well. Okay. The other way that you will be charged for S3 is the data transfer. Okay. So let me go back to North Virginia. Right. So for data transfer, anything that goes in is free. Okay. But anything that goes out to other regions, it will have a bit of cost. Right. In the same region, so if you look through the list, you're not going to see North Virginia, because in the same region, the data transfer is free. Right? So that's why I said when you're working, you work mainly in one region, right? You don't go across regions. Okay. All right. So there's two questions in the chat. What is your Discord channel? So I'll ask Adam to send you a link for the Discord invite in just a bit. Okay. The second question, does the free tier include free S3 storage? So S3, there is no really free, but if you're storing like very, very small files, so let's say a few text files or a few CSVs, that doesn't even add up to like half a gigabyte, you're probably not going to be charged. Okay? Because again, the chart is so small, they're not going to even see it. Okay? Now, the reason I mentioned data transfer is due to the fact that if you are transferring out to internet, right, it doesn't matter where the person is, even if they're in the same region as you, there will always be a charge. So transfer out to the internet means that anyone that takes the URI of your object, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a bit, right? Takes that URI and download it into their computer. Well, that's a transfer to the internet. Okay, so that only happens if the bucket itself is public. So most companies will have a private bucket, which means that even if you do have the correct URI, right, and you paste it into your browser, you're not going to have access to it. You'll be blocked. Okay, and that's the case both for the cost and for security reasons, right? They don't want to leak customer data or they don't want to leak sensitive information to the internet. But some organizations will have public buckets, such as the government with some public data that they want to make available to people. Maybe the library, right? Or like education. So like recall data, we have a public bucket as well, just so that students can access a few data from us, right? So those public buckets, when you use the URI and you paste it into the URL, you can actually download the file itself. Okay? So let me show you quickly, since we're kind of running out of time, right? So in the bucket, again, you need to give a bucket unique name. So when you create bucket, to ask you for a globally unique name. Okay? I'm not going to have enough time to explain all the other things here, but you can see there is block all public access by default, and basically there's all the encryptions that you can add to it as well, and just click on create bucket. If the bucket name is free, you just create it. If it's not free, so let me show you with Toronto just quickly. Right, if this is not free, and you click on create, all it's going to tell you is that this bucket name already exists. Okay, so it's not going to be like too much of trouble. Just change the name a bit and then try creating again. To show you an example of a public and a private bucket. Sorry, give me 1 second. So let's say this is a file in my private bucket. Right? If you click on the name, you see that there are these URI or even the object URL. So let me copy this and send it to everyone. You can try it out yourself. Right? If you paste this into your browser, you're going to be having access denied, right? Because you don't have access because it's a private bucket. Okay. However, let me show you one with our recall data bucket. Okay. And I'll just quickly use a data set for you. Right. So let's say this is a file in our public bucket. You can try out yourself as well. Right. Once you paste it in, you just download the file directly. Right. So this one is public, so you can actually access it. So here it is, even though it didn't change here. Right. So that's the difference between public and private buckets. Okay. The question here, would you please add an example app through the Identity Center? I'm not quite sure what you mean by the app. Yeah, so could you explain a bit more? So usually the Identity Center is just setting up a user profile, and then everything else will be done by the user itself. So you don't really need an app to monitor the users themselves. And just quickly, I want to show you EC2 as well. So sorry, it's a bit rust, but EC2 is the other service I use very, very often. Okay. So in EC2, this is region bound, right? So I want you to pay attention to some of these numbers. For example, the instance running, right? It has 2, or the instances has 22. Okay. And I am in North Virginia, right? If I were to switch to another region, so let's say Ohio, notice how the number changes, right? So all the objects in EC2 are region bound, okay? And you can just take that as a default for all the all of the services, right? So if you are using a service, make sure it is in the same region as all the other services. Okay, it doesn't have to be North Virginia. I just picked North Virginia because it's first on the list and it's the oldest region, right? But all these services should be in the same region so that data transfer between them will be free. Okay. And quickly, I just want to show you some of the differences between instances. So we're not going to have enough time to talk about how to set it up. Okay. So for instances, there are 3 types of instance state in general. Okay, there is stop instance, there is a running instance, and there's a terminating instance. Okay. So running instances are the ones that are up and active. So these are the ones that will be charging you per hour, per instance. Okay. And the price, and just quickly showing you here. Here it is. Right. The price will depend on the instance type. And the instance type just tell you how big, how powerful the instances are. Okay. So you can see that they change slightly when you move up and move down. Okay. For free tier, it is only T2 micro. And if the region doesn't have T2 micro, it will be T3 micro. Right. And the other caveat for free tier, as you can see here, it is in your first year, but it's only 750 hours. Okay. So it's either or. Okay. It's not first year and 750 hours. Right. So you had your first year free. And if you don't use it, you have 750 hours later. It's not that. It's either or. So if you meet 750 hours first, you are the free tier, even though if like the first 3 months, right? Or if you used it for the first year and you still have hours left, it's gone. Okay. So it's either or between these two. Okay. And again, for the price, you can pay attention to on-demand price. Usually the Linux is preferred because it is the cheapest one between them. Okay. But you can set it to be Mac, to be Ubuntu, which is another popular one, Windows, and other type of systems. Okay. So with running, you're paying per instance per hour. Either it's on demand or spot price, if that's what you choose. For stop instance, these are not costing you per hour anymore, but there might be a small storage charge, okay, depending on how much files you have on there. Okay, stop instances, you basically give back the compute power, and when you reactivate it, they'll give you a new IP address, and the IP address is kind of like your identifier for instance, right? So when you log in, you use the IP address to log in. So when you restart it, you'll give you a new kind of instance with all the files that are there. Okay. And the last one is the terminated one. Terminated is basically shutting everything down, right? So you're not keeping the compute power and you're not keeping the files. So everything is erased. Okay. For that, you are not being charged anymore as soon as it is terminated. And it takes about like half a minute to terminate, right? So when you're working, you have to decide, do I want to keep the files on my instance for next time? Or can I set it up again very quickly the next time I open it, right? So if you need to keep it, you have to have a very good reason. So there has to be a lot of setup, a lot of work to get everything running, okay? Otherwise, is how should I put it? It will uh it it will be cost inefficient to keep a bunch of data files on your instance, right? So if your only reason to keep it, to make it stop, is because you have a bunch of data files, right? Send it to S3, so save everything to S3 from your instance, and then terminate it, because there's no need to store data on EC2, right? But if your reason is I have a lot of setup, so I install a bunch of programs, and it took like hours for it to set up, so the next time I don't want to do that same thing again, then I'll stop it. Maybe I'll be charged a little bit for the storage fee, but it shouldn't be too much, right? And then tomorrow I can restart it again and continue working with the setup. So unfortunately for today, I can only talk about these two services, and I even rust a little bit. So some of the questions here, will you continue the session in another time to solve the rest? We'll definitely consider it. We'll try to schedule another time to show you some of the other services. Even with EC2, there's a lot of things that we didn't talk about, such as setting up the security credentials for EC2, and how that affects how you work with it. Okay. For the other one, the applications for one of your projects, there's a button in the, sorry, let me go back. In users. Oh, just want the cloud app. Is that what you're asking for? So I don't think you need to know how to do this. Because all this is doing is kind of watching how much um service you're using. Um, basically keeping track of how much you're spending, right? So it's not really like an app that you use like I know, like Facebook or Instagram where you can actually do some process. It's more to monitor. Okay. All right. Any other questions from the audience? Okay. Uh, all right. So again, there's so much more that you can explore on yeah, sorry. I'm just asking Adam to send it. So there's so much more services you can explore on AWS. Um, make sure you do take some time if you do create an account to explore them. One other ones I want to show you just very quickly because it's a sorry, software as a service. And I just want to look for recognition. Okay. This might be something that you want to use for your own project because it is free. Basically it is to create labels. Okay. Uh, so you can upload an image and you'll give you kind of these decision boxes. Okay, this is pre-trained, so you don't have to do anything. All you have to do is upload image. Okay. So just I believe it's free, so you can try that. Um, oh, can you give brief about course or service you guys are offering and how much? Um, Okay, let me talk about this course and I'll give it to Adam about the links and the costs and everything else. Or maybe you can ask that in Discord as well. But for the courses, we do have a lot of different self-paced courses that are either open or in development. So if you do have any suggestions, when you look at our page, we are updating the web page as well. So we call data. Okay. So for our courses, uh, we are designing a lot more self-paced course because we know that a lot of you are busy and you do want to learn while we have TA support, but maybe a rigid schedule might not work for you. Okay. So we are designing courses such as SQL, Python, big data, so AWS, or even other services as well. Okay. And we have AI and machine learning and all that in development. So if you do have a course or a topic that you're interested in, please let us know through Discord. And we'll see if one of course matches up with you, or if we can see if that course can be developed in the near future. Okay, so you can be interested. And yeah, and like Adam said, if you have any questions, please contact us through either of those channels. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Okay. In that case, we'll wrap it up here for today. If we do have another session later on, we will make an announcement to everyone in Discord as well. So again, Discord might be the best place to join for all these announcements. Okay. Other than that, I just want to say thank you for everyone for taking your lunch time and joining me today. Hopefully it was a bit informative. Okay. And I'll hopefully to see everyone again in another session later on. Okay. Bye everyone.